First, I'd like to thank Mono Aware for helping us with the projection, and also I know that the Hide was made in the context of a residency or a workshop.
A class that I took, a 16mm class that I highly recommend. Anyone who's not worked with Mono no Aware, I would like to thank you, Steve. Yeah.
And also I'd like to thank BAXTER ST for having us, and also inviting Ohan and I and myself to present Phantom Sun in this space, and also in the context of BAXTER ST, and that relates a lot to the history of photography. And as we'll share tonight, there's a lot. The show has a lot to do with the history of photography and processes. So. Maybe we began with the projection of Hide, which is a 16mm film, and I think we wanted to start with this film because it relates a lot. I mean, it centers the figure of the cow, who he's a very central figure in the work of Ohan. You can see the cow coming across the space of the exhibition, but also the cow is come across the work of Ohan through like a lot of different works. Of course, it's a way to elevate this figure of and the animal and resist anthropocentrism, but also in Hide there is this idea of because it's made with 16mm film, of thinking also about the process of the film and the contribution of the cow to the film itself, because the film is made with gelatin, which is a cow-related product. So there's all these different elements that are combined together in the work of Ohan, and that is really part of what we worked with in Phantom Sun, and really at the center of Phantom Sun, thinking about the processes and combining the image also with I mean, thinking about the subject and the material of the photography itself together. So it's kind of blending the material with the subject, and so Hide becomes this reference to hide the skin of the cow, but also hide thinking about how the cow itself and the animality of the film is hidden in the film. So erasing processes of making the film. And so Phantom Sun has a lot to do with this idea of highlighting processes that are part of the history of photography. And it started with a collection of photographs made in the 30s. I'm sure many of you have seen some of the photography of the Farm Security Administration. Many of the photography from the collection are very famous and kind of foreground what we now call the social documentary in the United States. But there is one part of this collection that's called the killed negatives. Perhaps you also know this part of the collection, but they are called this way because they were literally killed by Roy Stryker, the commissioner of the archives in the 30s, who was the head of the historical section of the Farm Security Administration, and he was also the one who commissioned photographers to go across the U.S. and document the life of farmers who were encountering environmental and economic an economic crisis. And so when a photograph didn't meet his criteria for what he thought was a good photograph, he will hole punch the negative. So by making the hole in the negative, it will also damage the print, and so it will come across with this black hole. So the black hole again also relates to the printing process and the process of making a photograph, which is at the heart of Phantom Sun relating to this black hole. And so today we're going to talk a lot about these different processes, and starting with this archive, and maybe and we call it the negative space because, of course, it speaks to this idea of how photography is made, starting from the negative to the positive space, and how it translates from like excess of light or like the hole in the negative to a black hole. or black shape on the photography, and also the negative space, thinking about the composition of an image, of what is hidden behind to make some things being more visible. So the logics of seeing and the politics of visibility. So going back to the cow and how the cow is made invisible in the materiality of the film. So this is the starting point for this conversation, and we have a very expanded view on the negative space. So we are going to, this concept is going to come back later in our conversation in different ways. But that's just an invitation to think about this concept, and I think it's very important in Phantom Sun. So that was a long introduction, but I'm very pleased to be with you, Ohan, and it was such a pleasure to work with you on this show and to continue our conversation. And so maybe we should start with the selection process. So there are in the exhibition many photos that are prints of negatives from the kill negatives. And they are all available on the Library of Congress archive, and you can print them on your own. And so Ohan included many of these prints, including slide projection with like a selection of maybe 40 images from the collection.
81.
81, sorry. My mistake. My bad, as my child say always. So we start with your selection.
Yeah, also thank you, Mathilde, for curating this exhibition, and thank you to everyone at Baxter for inviting us and for all of you for being here.
Yes, thank you so much for being here on this cold night in January.
It's kind of warm tonight.
Okay, sorry.
It's tomorrow.
So that's why you
get ready.
Okay, so first image of...
Yeah. So there's about 270,000 photographs that were included in the FSA archive. Of those, about 100,000 were killed. And so I went through those 100,000 images and selected some of which that are highlighting the landscape as witness or the animals that are inhabiting these spaces. And I made different categories, one of which was to look for images that were taken in the Northeast, since I live here or between here and the Berkshires. And so really thinking about the site specificity of where I'm spending time and where I have intimacy with the landscape in the archive. Another key factor was to look at first for vertical images. Oftentimes, traditionally, landscapes are photographed horizontally. And the way I photograph landscapes are almost always vertically, as if to think of the landscape as a person and create a landscape as a portrait. And the third factor was to look towards images that were depicting landscapes of environmental catastrophe. So a lot of the images are showing you scenes of flooding, of drought, of forest deforestation, burning, to really highlight what was happening in the environment between 1935 and 44 when these photographs were taken. And then another aspect for me is also kind of thinking about the landscape as places that maybe reflect like gender. Like for me, the waterfall feels like such a feminine form in a way. So thinking about my own insertion of like gender within these images that I'm very subjectively also picking. There's only 2 photographs in the show that depict people, and they're in the corner piece that's called Study for Silver and Study for Gelatin, which we'll talk about in a bit. But I did want to highlight 2 images that have people in it to talk about labor. So the aspects of this person, being a butcher, and then the second person is someone working in a silver mine.
Yeah, and there's also something we've been discussing a lot. That's so the Roy Stryker, the commission of the archive, always, and it was not an archive. It used to be called actually a file, and became an archive when he left his agency. And so he used to say that the faces are the most significant part of the file. And so thinking about how you really consider landscapes through like the faces, so the faces of Americans, struggling in the time of the Great Depression will be the landscape of America, will make America. And so I think here you kind of like decentralize humanity, or like the humanness of the archive. And so if we have human figure, they're mostly engaged in an action, like engaged within the landscape, or like altering the landscape or the land, or in an action of extracting, but they're really peripheral in the show.
Yeah. This is a factory where they were burning coffins. And then the horizontal images are the ones that you'll see in the 35 millimeter slide projector. So these are all horizontal. And like Mathilde was saying in the past, like from my studies in photography, where I first learned about the FSA archives, most of the images that my professors would show me would be images of people. And that's really where the focus was. They were mostly also white people. And so for me, it felt really important to move away from the human figure and really think about still things that are, human-made in the images in some of them, but thinking about almost like these haunted spaces that have been left behind. This is in Northampton, Massachusetts, and it's after a big flooding.
Can I ask you a question about the previous one?
Sure.
Did you find out if there was a very similar image to this that had not been killed? Because my understanding, and I have studied the FSA fairly intensively, is that a lot of the killing was because these were duplicate exposures, and there was a decision, this is a slightly better exposure, and we don't want, because this was a very tight government operation. It was not well funded compared with other government operations. It was always under attack from Republicans during the New Deal. And they didn't want people wasting time, the lab workers going, should we print from this one or should we print from this one? So Stryker really advised people, make a decision which of these two, which are very similar, and then kill, which sounds very violent, one, just so that we're not having someone waste 20 minutes going, is this the better one or is this the better one? So did you?
Sure. Yes. This one does have one that was not killed, but there's also 3 of the same one that were killed from different angles, for example. This one I also picked because, like you're saying, it's, to me it is quite violent actually, and I don't know if it's the word killing, I keep thinking of like the word to maim, negative, to like harm something that if it was killed, we wouldn't be looking at it. So it still is in a way alive in a different form. But for me, there's also a way of thinking of some of these images, even though they're about poverty or the environmental catastrophe that's happening during the Great Depression, seeing some that feel like they have a sense of humor or play. So even the reason I picked this one feels like this circle is somehow falling off the roof. So that's why I picked this one out of the 5 that are in the similar realm, either killed or not killed. Does that answer your question, Sally? Yeah, cool.
I just think that there's a way in which one can start seeing this. Now, the first person who worked with the killing really was trying to argue that there are some gender fluid or gay imagery that Stryker had no tolerance for, and therefore said, we have to get rid of this. But that a lot of this stuff is really about trying to make the file as efficient as possible for posterity.
Yes, totally, and that's true that most of the photographs that have been killed were duplicates, or like even like the better exposure, or like and also they were most of the time killed because of the framing, or so the framing was a little off, so it was like we need this idea. But also, it's interesting to think about 30s, whereas like these images were made, like photography is still an art in the making. So there's kind of also setting criteria for a good photograph, and so Roy Stryker like defines himself not only as the head of the historical section, but also has a good photo editor. So I think there's these two things that are come together, like the canon is in the making, and that's something also the show relates to that history by also thinking about like as other canons were in development, like surrealistic and photograms, other canons that were in development at the same time. So it's photography is really in the emerging form at this time. So. And that's true that the historical section, like this photographies or this mission was seen as like a propagandish and like mission, but also socialist mission. So there was a lot of attack from the Congress. So he had to also show that that was useful. The photographs were beautiful. The money was not wasted. And that's something that I read through like the work of another artist who worked with these archives, William E. Jones. And we're going to talk about his own way of thinking about this archive. But yeah, there's a lot of, but thank you for raising this, because I don't think we're making the argument in here like it's only because it doesn't fit the public narrative. But there is still an idea of what a social document should be, still in the photos that he picked and the photographer he picked. But yeah, so but please continue raising questions as we go. So this one, maybe you want to...
I mean, with this one, I just thought it was interesting because they're photographing with 35 millimeter cameras, but then we have a large format camera. So I was either thinking the photographer must have been with another photographer who had two cameras. So there was something about this like doubling that was interesting to me. Here too, thinking the photographer looks like they're sitting in the car, but it's clearly very flooded. So just even thinking about the positionality of the photographer and like how amazing this composition is, and how the black holes doubling the rear view window, like things in the window are closer than they appear.
And the double again.
Yeah.
To, yeah. Was like related to agriculture and farmer activity. And sometimes, they will do like a crossing and a hole. So it's like doubly condemned, right? And this one is more about extraction.
Mm-hmm.
These are from the Northeast.
Mm-hmm.
And here is an animal. So there is a lot of focus on the non-humans, but also on the land, but also on non-humans. And so we started with the cow, with your film height, and then also in the photography, there are a lot of, in the archives, there are a lot of animals as companions of farmers and part of the farming activity. So maybe would you like to talk about this also?
Yeah, I was interested that in the archive there's actually very few animals, because it was mostly focusing on the people, and I thought that it's important to kind of highlight the different animals, and looking at hoofed animals that are used for the gelatin. So cows or sheep, goats, pigs are the, I think, 4 species that I was focusing on. Yeah.
That's also a code for like the archive that is written on the negative. This one feels very targeted, no? someone was telling me about like the hole in the face.
I mean, the reason that we picked, or that I picked, but us together as a team picked this as the first one in the exhibition, maybe we can go to that one, I guess Roy Stryker didn't like if people return the gaze. He said it felt like could everyone hear me? Yeah, okay. It felt like too staged if people were returning the gaze, not like documentary enough. And this one, the cow is clearly returning the gaze. And so I just thought this was a really good choice for the first photograph. It kind of is looking outside, so it's luring you into the gallery. And then once you're in here, it greets you. There's also, I think, a sense of humor in it. I should maybe also note that all of the FSA photographs that I printed them much larger than my own works, some of which are even monumental, like the waterfall installation that feels almost like a column or a totem pole. So that's one way to also differentiate between what's archival or what's taken, over 100 years ago versus what I created the last year.
And also this one is printed at almost life size, so it's like almost a person, as you said, like the land as a person, but also the animal as a person. And it's the first image that we come across when we enter, so it becomes kind of our greeter, the host of the show. And so here are other cows across your work.
Yeah. So I just finished a large project called Belly of a Glacier that's in the film. It's a photographic project and a film installation, but in the film it begins with the birth of a cow and then ends with a speculative glacier funeral where the cow is the last attendant. And so when I knew that I wanted to start a new project, I wanted to continue working with an archive, because in this film I also worked with the Swiss and French Bureau's archive. That's a scientific archive documenting the Rhone Glacier that then turns into the Rhone River and flows into the Mediterranean Sea. And when I decided I wanted to focus my attention on the contemporary American landscape, it made the most sense for me to start studying the FSA archive. But I also thought the starting point should be where I ended my last project, which is with the cow. And this is just a still from the film at the glacier funeral.
What type of cow is this one?
Her name is Bugs. She's a Hollywood cow.
And here is an image of the installation. So I'd love for you now maybe to talk a lot more about how you responded to the archives through your own experiments, and the space of dialogue you created with these two works together.
Yeah, I really felt like the archival work and my work were almost like in a dance together, or type of choreography in tandem, where you'll first see the FSA archival photograph, and then you'll see this installation called Umbra, Tools for Darkness. Umbra is the word used to describe the darkest part of a shadow. And for me, I think when I came across the archive, because so many people have done incredible work about it, have written about it, also contemporary artists have worked with it. For me, it felt really important to take an approach where I'm trying to make sense of this black hole in terms of its materiality. And for me, my framework for that was to create a space where I'm looking at three different architectures. One's the dark room as a space of erotics, or a space of like kind of magic, mysticism, or like alchemy in a way. The first space where I really fell in love with photography. So this installation consists of three photograms called Ouroboros Tube 1, 2, 3, that are these tubes that I use in the dark room where water flows through in order to wash the photographic prints. And so it has this like gunk in it from the water that's been flowing, for a very long time through the grounds in Western Massachusetts and through the tubes into the dark room. They also kind of feel like like something in relation to like medicine or science, or the body. And then the other images in this are objects that are used in the darkroom. So these are two like objects that you would use to make sure the grain is in focus. There's also a plastic bag where I like spit in it, so it's bodily fluids. Uncanny Valley is a title that I think very much is like a timely term that we're using. Also, you know, someone who teaches photography and thinking about the relationship to photography and AI, but going into the darkroom and like almost in a way like protesting against it in a very like embodied sense, but still making sure that a title like this would be reflecting the times we're living in. And then I think the next one should be, yeah, dodge dog. So these are tools that would be used for dodging and burning in the dark room. It also looks like a dog head to me. And then there's a series, so there's those 5 photograms done in the darkroom that are all the tools for darkness, like thinking about, you know, photography from Greek means to draw with light. But I'm really interested in the darkness aspect that I think we don't talk enough about, or how we relate photography not just to light, but to the darkness that we're relying on, both in terms of like being in the darkroom as a space, but also in terms of like extractive notions of either heavy metals or minerals that we're drilling from the ground, or animals that we're relying on. And so I did a series of these photographs of pigs' bladders. There's this essay I'm really inspired by Ursula K. Le Guin, The Carrier Bag Theory of Fiction. It's a 1986 essay where she describes the carrier bag as the first tool that we used, and oftentimes we think it's the spear. So kind of trying to go against this notion of masculinity or a weapon to kill, and to think about the carrier bag as something that is for holding, for carrying, for thinking about storytelling on a more horizontal level. And so historically, the pig splatters were used for carrying different substances, one of which is to hold oil paints. So artists used them. Also, musical instruments were made out of them. Of course, American footballs, and then for like healing purposes in medicine.
And of course, you elevate this kind of. You told me about the process, like it's really like animal, very like really abject almost material, and then you elevate into this beautiful, almost like, you know, looks like paper and still life.
Yeah, yeah, and it's like I don't, you know, eat pork. For me, it was hard to do this, I guess I'll say. Like I put my lips on it and blew it up like a balloon, and, you know, at the end gave it to my friend's dog to eat. So there was this whole kind of abject relationship to the insides of a pig that also felt like a really instrumental tool to make sense of what this absence presence is of this killed negative space. Like going inside, like I really see it almost like as a portal in relation to how to make sense of the image on a very material level. Yeah, and then the third component of this piece is these sticking Tommies, and I guess I should say red, white, and blue melted candles. Sticking Tommies are iron candle holders that were used in the silver mines. So it's basically, we have the dark room as one component. We have the slaughterhouse, thinking about the pig's bladders that are also used to make the gelatin as one component. And then we have the silver mine as the third component. So I collected these candle holders and then put candles. The first 3, there's one at the very end that has the original candle still in it, but these 3 are newer candles that we lit in the gallery space, but they're red, white, and blue, also to reference the American flag.
And of course, the American narrative, like that was also built in the archive. So like drips of candle, so it's like also messy, you know, messy version of the public narrative. Or and that's the silver study.
Yeah, so this is the corner piece. It's silver study and then gelatin study, where I made a collage using images from the FSA archive, but then also a photograph of a silver rock and then drawings from silver mines, and then printed them on aluminum as like referencing a modernization of a different type of like heavy metal that's also used within photographic processes. I really, like, as it says study, feel like it's a generous way of showing you like my thinking process of like, one component is the silver, this is what it's made out of, this is how I'm making sense of what's happening in a space underneath the ground, even though I've never been there, but I, spend much time with these images. And then with the gelatin study, it's hung also maybe in the gallery space, which I would consider the negative space, the corner space that we usually don't use in terms of the architecture, but it's installed as if it's almost like a book, right? So on one side of the page, you're looking towards what's happening in the silver mine. On the other page, you're looking at the gelatin.
Yeah, so we have light, silver, and animal-derived products, so 3 elements that are really defining what is a photography and essential to the making process, but also you pointing out the extractive nature of the making of a photograph. We've been talking a lot about the camera, the shutter, and in reference to Ariela Azoulay, who's in Potential History, Unlearning Imperialism, talks a lot about the shutter of the camera as an imperial device, and this idea that the shutter really extract, decontextualize. And I think here you trying to also rematerialize the production of a photograph. So it's like in sort of recontextualization, but through materiality.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit more about this process of, I know you have all this, we had all this conversation about the terms that are used to in photography, like refers to the warfare, and
Yeah, I mean, when I teach my class, the first class, we talk about language in relation to photography and how we say, I'm sure many of you have thought about this or heard this, but I'm shooting a photograph, I'm capturing you, I'm framing you, and to think about new words we can use, like I'm creating an image, or I'm making a picture, or so I think like thinking even like with how language is deeply linked to forms of extraction, and how we can change the way that we speak about something that's so ingrained, or how we can start to make sense of what's in this, because everything about photography so much is about the surface, but if we go into the actual like labor practices and what's happening to make that surface, is similar to like how I think about language in that same way, or like how to use poetics to move away from something, or how to use areas of like study or collage or more playful approaches when thinking about like very dark histories.
And also I'd be really interesting to discuss a little bit this politics of collaboration, because this exhibition is a dialogue and a response to an existing work, and by photographers who are not named in the archive, but they are known. They are like about 10 photographers, and so I will be curious to know more about what type of collaboration is for you.
I mean, it very much feels like a collaboration with ghosts, or, people who are no longer alive, but with images that still are. A lot of these images were never supposed to be printed or see the light of day, but because these photographers were hired or were doing, specific jobs and sending these images to Roy Stryker, I would assume that they would have wanted them to be seen, or some of them, Of course, we'll never know which ones, but I think there's something important for me to think about this archive in relation to the time period that they were taken in, and where there's certain parallels, but then also differences that are happening in the world that we're living in today. And for me to look at this archive is a way to kind of make sense, I think, of this like very difficult time and fascist regime that we're living in. I think there's a few things that I see a lot of similarities. So it's like obviously the Dust Bowl or this Great Depression in relation to environmental issues. I see a lot of parallels that are happening today in this country and in the world. A lot of issues around racism and white supremacy that's still very current today. And I know, Sally, you said that the money wasn't that much that the photographers received, but it's much more than the money that any photographers today are receiving. So also thinking about how Trump is taking away funding for artists or cutting budgets that is really like affecting the arts and culture and education, which feels really in opposition to what was happening there. So I think for me to activate these images in relation to mine was to think about this like intergenerational exchange between a group of photographers that are, you know, unknown in terms of these killed negatives, to give them another life and to kind of make sense of what they were seeing in a time period where I'm really trying to make sense of what I'm seeing, like, which I don't know. Like, also I should say this is, you know, a very new project. So I still have a lot of questions. And there's questions around like ethics for sure that I thought about and that I still do have questions about. For example, you know, if I were, which, you know, I want to expand this project, should these works have wall labels next to them? Should each one be described in a specific way? Should I be giving more information? For this exhibition, I chose not to kind of leave it more open-ended for people to have questions, the same way that I'm feeling like I have questions. I don't know if that's the right approach, but
yes,
yeah.
And yes, it's a study, still a study,
Yeah.
and we also that was what this invitation was. Like, it was an invitation to start a project, and it was amazing to be able to make it public in such a small time. Like, I think we worked on it for like the last 6 months, so came together pretty fast, and I'm amazed about already how far you went. And I think that's also what the concept of unidentified is about, because I think there's a lot of those images that we could identify. And I think, as Sally mentioned, there are a lot of duplicates. So we could, and there are photographers who actually found the names of the photographer, or at least can identify them. So they are not unknown, they're more unidentified, and that's a process that we could work on. I think what I found very exciting about this killed negative is that they still exist, you know, which is kind of also kind of very interesting, because they could have been, you know, destroyed and as damaged negative, but still Roy Stryker decided to keep them, and they are part of the selection of images that he selected for the archive, or for the Library of Congress. So they have this space of experiment attached to it, and also like inviting new generations of artists, of thinkers, to look at that and to look at maybe the failures or confront the failures of this archive. So I think this is kind of what is interesting.
Yeah, I also think a lot of these were taken with nitrate film that would have been dissolved by now, or like blown up in flames. And so I think one reason why they were preserved was because of this specific type of photographic technique that also no longer exists. So the way that I was thinking about this installation is also in a very unruly way of like thinking about different technologies, like the 35mm projector that was invented in 1935 and then mostly came to use in the 50s and 60s for educational purposes, to a digital print, the pink photograph, to a sticky Tommy candle from a silver mine. So it's like really thinking about almost like the wildness of what the photographic medium has done and has continued to do through these aspects of like expansion, I guess, for me.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I think that it's a very generous show in that way. Like you experiment different forms of photography making and you combine them together. I think the next images we have are kind of like mentors and a project that can inform your methodology. And I think there is in that way, yes, this project is one one step or one more steps and maybe a final series, but it's like a space of experiment. And that's really how we work together. I pushed you to be more playful with the archive, to also think about the absurdity of this black hole in some of the photographs. And there's a lot of humor in the show.
Mm-hmm.
So this, one of the photographs that you...
Yeah, I usually don't do this, but I just thought because of like the history of Baxter and thinking about how this archive is being reanimated, to also just give appreciation to 3 mentors or figures that I worked closely with. So Ken Gonzalez is the person who taught me photography. And it's interesting to think back when I was his student between 2002 and 2006. He was working on his book, Lynching in the West, 1850 to 1935. Where it consists of 2 parts for those of you who are not familiar with the work. One of which is he's looking at archival photographs that are taken of people, Latinx people being lynched in the state of California, and then he digitally removes the bodies as to create awareness through the erasure of something, thinking about these photographs as like trophies. And then this other part of the project is him with a large format documenting trees where people had been lynched and using a flash on it. So thinking of like crime photography. So I feel like even though obviously this show is completely different, there's some aspect of like thinking about how the archive is being used or what has been erased in relation to his work, or the way that he also is paying attention to these landscapes or trees in particular of witness to these like horrific acts without showing the actual acts.
Without sensationalizing once again
Exactly.
the destroyed body.
Exactly. Yeah. It's all about wanting it to be invisible, to have it as
because a lot of the recirculation of lynching photos has been criticized as well for once again making a sensation of seeing completely mortified bodies left hanging. So Ken wanted nothing to do with that.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, very like approach to care and research in a way where this project doesn't only exist as a photographic project or like installation project, but also through this book where he talks so in depth about it. Yeah.
And also something that runs through your practice is the idea of like the land as a witness.
Sheila Brooke, she taught me class. I went to Cal Arts, and so she taught me classes about like the landscape and gardens and this spirals. Can we talk? Tit for twat is her turning the story of Adam and Eve into Madam and Eve. So very much centering like being a dyke and like thinking about like lesbian histories in relation to collage work and landscapes. That's Kathy Opie there on the left, who she was dating at the time.
And Oprah.
Huh?
And Oprah.
Yeah, yeah. I thought people knew that, but so, yeah. And then maybe, Sally, you want to talk about this?
No. You get to talk about this.
So yeah, I was one of Alan Sekula's last 12 students at Cal Arts, and there's something really interesting when I look. I wasn't thinking about this when I installed the show. I was making this work, but now when I return to this, there's some similarities in the way that, not only, do I have so much gratitude towards him for the way that he taught me about like social realism and to think about photographs allowing to, keep asking questions rather than to give us answers, but also to think about how maybe different bodies of work can still somehow function within the same space.
And also, of course, the relation to labor that is so fundamental to your research on the FSA archive, and replacing these images in the history of labor and photography in the history of labor, global capitalism, and I've been thinking about how you add the environmental aspect to it, like really adding this lens that is really yours through your practice.
Yeah. Maybe I should say, with his work, I love that he would you know, is growing up in San Pedro and really thinking about the piers in San Pedro and, you know, how he made like Forgotten Space, where he like is not only a photographer, but also a filmmaker, also, you know, a theorist and a deep thinker, writer, researcher, you know, so important to photography, but that he still would always return to this place of where he was from. And I think that's something that I feel very in alignment with, like returning to the Swiss Alps is very important, or now knowing I live in this country, I just got tenure at Williams, I better like, you know, embrace Western Massachusetts and start calling that home. And because of that, like going deep into the archive in the place that I now call home as a way to really connect like the personal to the political, or an archive to like a felt presence of where I am.
And here you kind of like also ground that with the archive, looking at the landscape from from there. And then we have one of the installations we were talking about the importance of blank space in the show. Like there's a sort of rhythm, but also there's a lot of space for meditation where there is nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a one. And I wanted. Oh, sorry. And during the making of this project, there was a Man Ray exhibition at the Met. Probably most of you have seen it, but that was interesting to think about the photograms and the play of Man Ray with light and the like what you call the drawing of light, but also and I think that was kind of from us in our collaboration thinking a lot about how we can play with the materiality of the black hole, of the materiality of the objects, and also thinking also about play and experiment, but also subconscious, like thinking beyond just like the subject itself. And of course, something maybe you wanted to bring to the fore, and I would love for you to talk about it, like how the FSA archive was made almost at the same time as those images. So it's kind of like the same moment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, he's still in the mid-30s making photograms, Man Ray. So I thought there's something really interesting thinking about this documentary practice, which of course also started to make documentary photography art photography, but then this practice that's happening around the very same time period that is very much in the realm of art. And like, I guess for me, I was thinking about how do we bridge these two things? They feel equally important. This is coming out of like Dadaism that's found in 1916, where I'm from. So I think there's this relationship to like play or thinking about Dada that of course then leads into surrealism and this like way of thinking about photography through like chance or through lack of like purposely maybe losing control or trying to have fun in the dark room, you know, after or during people are experiencing so much hardship. So I think there's some parallels again with the way that I'm looking towards the dark room or this specific process in relation to the political time that we're in that felt very timely with what he was doing in relation to the FSA photographers.
And another, so that's an installation with the photograms and the play with the image, and also William E. Jones, which we mentioned. And yes, if you want to talk about it.
Yeah, so the first time I ever experienced the killed negatives was in Los Angeles at an exhibition curated by my partner Shari Kalajian in 2014 called The Heart is the Frame. And it really stuck with me, but to be honest, I didn't know what I was looking at the time. I think I just was like really drawn to it visually. And the way that he did this, it's a video work. It's an animated piece where he took these stills from the archive, but then he zoomed in on all of the individual photos and then created a stop motion video that's moving quite fast. And so the black hole really becomes this like center of his video. And he's animating this black hole. And even though in most of his images there's people, I think there's a few animals, I remember it mostly being people. Yes. I remember thinking in this case, it almost also looks like a bullet or something that relates to violence, especially when it's with people, or especially if the black hole is on the body. And yeah, just interesting that this is where I saw it the first time, and then it's from 2014, like 12 years later, somehow like coming back to me in this way that, of course, you know, it's also just to say I'm, you know, in the lineage of other queer photographers or video artists that are working with this archive that must have somehow stayed with me. Yeah.
Yes, we've been talking also about his concept of the way he framed his relation to the FSA archive. He talks about the kill negative being a perversion of the FSA archive, or like the unofficial. And I think, of course, it goes to your perspective as, you know, trans feminists, thinking a lot about what is cast aside, what is left out of the narrative, and looking back at this archive through that lens. And so the last image is this one, which is maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, so the exhibition kind of ends with this photograph and then one of the sticky Tommies. That's with the original candle. This is a series that I'm now working on, so it also felt like a good way to end an exhibition with something that I'm about to do. So when I started to think about how to make sense of this archive and make sense of the current American landscape, I came across this foundry where I thought maybe instead of documenting the actual landscape or the animals in the landscape or the people in the landscape, I want to go and photograph the inside of these busts that make national monuments. That's how I like materially made sense of that black hole. So what we're looking at here is like the inside of, you know, a bust. It's this this pink rubber. It's one of a kind, but then of course, however many times you fill it up with a substance, you can make replications, these sculptural replications. And so I felt like there was this very strong link between sculpture and photography in relationship to the negative space, which is what we're looking at here as like a positive image. And then thinking about how that links to the negative space on the negative becoming that like presence or the main focused portal that I'm like pivoting this whole exhibition around. Also, the bald eagle is the only animal that is only in this country, that like all the other animals have either gone extinct or through like colonialism or have been like transported to other regions. So this is the only native animal to this country, if that makes sense. And of course, it's a symbol of power. It's also quite a pathetic bird. It's like not so smart. It's quite lazy. It's, you know.
But it's a symbol of America.
Exactly, it's a symbol of America.
Wait a second, I think that Canada also has bald eagles. So it's North America.
Yes, North America.
I'm
Yes.
sorry, it's not just US. I mean, we have fetishized it.
Yes.
But it also exists in Canada as a bird.
Yes, it's in North America. Yes, in North America. And yeah, so I'm hanging it also very low as kind of this like ending of the exhibition to think about its relationship to power. The pink also is the pink that would be in the trans flag. So there's something about this color that I feel really drawn to. Yeah.
So that's our.
I feel like we talked a lot.
Yes.
I hope that was not too much, but yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Ohan.